Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UCL and to this roundtable which UCL is organising in cooperation with the Embassy of the Czech Republic in London in memory of Václav Havel, a remarkable figure, politically, culturally, ethically. Indeed, no doubt one of the remarkable people of the last 40 years. My name is Robin Ainsworth, and I'm the director of the UCL School of Slavonic and East European Studies, otherwise known as SEAS. And so I'm here to welcome you to this round table. I think we can say confidently, and not just optimistically, that it really would have been unthinkable for UCL and for SEAS not to hold such a round table in memory of Václav Havel. From the point of view of UCL, it's because UCL has a unique breadth in terms of the study of the languages and culture of the whole of Europe, and not just things political and economic, a unique breadth of any university in the UK. And one of the initiatives recently which seeks to bring that breadth of the study of languages and culture together with the study of politics, society, economics is the recently founded European Institute at UCL. And if you haven't been involved with that, and I know that some people here have, then I highly recommend you to sort of look at the website and to work with us in that European Institute. But even more particularly and specially, it would have been unthinkable not to hold this round table hosted with the Embassy of the Czech Republic at SEAS, because SEAS is personally tied in terms of our founding, in terms of our history, with Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. How are we so personally tied? Well, at our very founding, one of the founding figures of SEAS was Tomáš Masaryk, who went on, as you know, to become the first president of Czechoslovakia. And so it seems very fitting that we should hold, and not merely fitting but only right, that we should hold this round table in memory of the last president of Czechoslovakia and the first president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. So it's a great honor to welcome you here on this occasion. And it's a particular honor, and this is where I conclude and hand over to our speakers, it's a particular honor to welcome our three speakers, who are enormously distinguished. And we're very pleased to have an international run-up to our speakers. And here is Professor Jacques Roupnik of Sciences Po in Paris, Professor Timothy Garton Ash of the University of Oxford, and His Excellency Michael Jantovsky, the Ambassador of the Embassy of the Czech Republic in London. And without more ado, I'm going to pass on to our three speakers. Timothy Garton Ash is going to speak first, Professor Roupnik, Jacques Roupnik second, and His Excellency third. And then we'll have some brief contributions from SEAS staff with a specialist expertise in Czech literature, culture, politics. And then we'll have an open discussion around the table, including the whole of the round table, i.e. audience as well. So without more ado, if I can ask Professor Timothy Garton Ash to speak first.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have to say that this, for me, has already the element of a Havel play, because we did a very similar event in Oxford last week with Ambassador Jantovsky and a third person who happened not to be Jacques Roupnik, alas. And so what you get today will be enriched by the previous discussion. And one can imagine the Havel play, in which we have a series of events in which the cast keeps changing, and perhaps the story of the life develops accordingly. I first met Václav Havel in Prague in January 1984 when he had just emerged from a long, nearly 4-year imprisonment. I wish I could convey to those of you who don't remember it how weird a place Prague was in the Orwellian year of 1984. The sleeping beauty of the city, the grey, bureaucratic, absurdist stuff of so-called normalized Czechoslovakia, and then this extraordinary upside-down world of the dissidents with philosophers working as stokers, stoking boilers, and historians working as window cleaners and economists as bricklayers. So I spent most of my time in cellars talking to stokers or talking to window cleaners or bricklayers about the philosophy of Patočka and bicameral legislatures. And I have it all recorded carefully in this notebook. And of course the high point was the conversation with Václav Havel, and so I turned to that page. But so concerned was I about secrecy that I didn't record anything at all in the notebook. So it just says to Havel, and there's an arrow, and somewhere those notes are so well hidden that maybe one day I'll find them. But I will never forget the conversation in the Riverside apartment, looking over Tama, where so many visited him. First impressions. A strikingly uncommanding figure. Havel was quite a short man, somewhat stooped, remarkably diffident, almost hesitant in manner. That was, of course, deceptive. He very often knew exactly what he wanted, but quite diffident in manner, quite unlike, say, Wałęsa or Pope John Paul II, who immediately told you what was what. The immediate impression of someone with a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, I think this is something that throughout his life, in whatever role struck one about Havel, the humor. I remember him telling me in that meeting that he was followed wherever he went by a secret policeman, of course, and at one point he wanted to go to the sauna, whereupon his narc, his secret policeman, sound effects courtesy of cease. His secret policeman came shuffling up to him and said, "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Havel, but could you please wait a minute, because I have a pacemaker. And if I go into the sauna, I'm afraid I might have a heart attack." And so Havel very sweetly waited on the corner with his secret policeman for 20 minutes until a replacement could be found who could come into the sauna. Very characteristic Havel. But also something else, which I think is very important. Because part of the Havel fable is, of course, the playwright who became president, the creative artist who just happened into politics. Havel was always a supremely political animal. Unlike, for example, Aung San Suu Kyi, who I've also had the privilege of meeting, who I think, I hope I'm proved wrong, is not a truly political animal, Havel was always a very political animal, even in the depth of his dissident days, and the analysis was extremely sharp. And the analysis he gave me at that time was very much that of what I think of as one of his absolutely finest essays. And if you only read one thing by Václav Havel, read The Power of the Past, which is, in my view, a truly great essay on the character of communism and the way to get out of it. It came in a samizdat collection of essays by various opposition figures, which is itself very well worth reading. There are many other fine texts in there, like Benjamin Kusi and others. But Havel's is the jewel in the crown. the key points of the analysis will be familiar to many of you. The greengrocer, who puts in his window the sign, "Workers of the world unite." Why does he do it, Havel asked? Does he really believe that the workers of the world should unite? No, it's a sign, a semiotic indication of his readiness to conform. And he builds a whole analysis around that famous picture of the greengrocer. The essential insight that the line in what he called post-totalitarian society did not run clearly and sharply between the good guys and the bad guys, the opposition and the collaborators. The line, he says, runs through every single individual. Every one of us is part oppositionist and part collaborator. Some more than others, of course. Havel may be 98%, 2%, others the other way around, but nonetheless, the way the system works is by winning a degree of collaboration from the majority of its people. An insight which is fundamental to the literature on civil resistance. The insight also that this system was a logocracy, that it worked by the semantic occupation of the public sphere, or what Orwell and Solzhenitsyn analyzed as organized lying. And therefore the simple gesture of speaking the truth, of living in truth, as Havel called it, was itself a political act of the first importance. And last but not least, the insight that change, lasting change, would not come from above, through reform from above, the illusion of the Prague Spring, that would come from social organization from below, in combination, it would be hoped, with negotiation-ready elements within the regime, which is, of course, what actually happened. And the famous phrase he used, the fifth column of social consciousness. And every time we met from that time on, he would say, the fifth column of social consciousness is growing, slowly but surely. Another meeting I remember when I drove up to see him in his country house in Hradeček, in the former Sudetenland. The entrance to the house was blocked by the secret police, so I had to drive around the back into the woods and make my way conspiratorially down through the very damp Bohemian woods and creep into the back of the farmhouse, looking like a picture book image of the agent of Western imperialism coming to visit the dissident. But again, it gave a wonderful opportunity to talk at length. By the way, one of the really good things about communism was that people had time. Time to talk. We talked for most of the day. When capitalism arrived, someone called it the Americanization of time. Time was chopped up into half-hour appointments. But we talked at great length. Again, he shared his insights about the nature of communism. He talked about his experience of imprisonment with this rather sadistic Stalinist commandant of the prison who was constantly telling him what he could and couldn't write. So he had to write in a kind of code. For example, when he wanted to talk about the regime, he couldn't say the regime, so he wrote the social collective manifestation of the not I. And he wonderfully said, when I reread it, they were published, of course, as a letters to Olga, he said, when I reread them now, I sometimes don't know myself what I meant, because the meaning was so hidden. But again, the political analysis, the firm conviction that the fifth column of social consciousness was growing, a somewhat reluctant acknowledgement that change was coming in the Soviet Union, and eventually that might have an impact, although he was slow to recognize, I think it's fair to say, the reality of the change coming from Mikhail Gorbachev. In my view, my personal view, I won't even say my view, in my personal feeling, these dissident years were, for me personally, his greatest years. And they were his greatest years because he didn't know, nobody knew, none of us knew, that it was going to end in 1989. It might have gone on to 1999 or 2009. And there were very, very few people who had the courage and the vision just to keep going in and out of prison, followed by the secret police, without the knowledge, without what Bergson called the illusions of retrospective determinism. He didn't know. In that period, he was magnificent. Second period that I want to talk about briefly are what came to be known as the Velvet Revolution. I was lucky enough to be with the Velvet Revolutionaries in the Magic Lantern Theatre. Just a couple of points about that. One is that if I compare it with Poland or with Hungary or with East Germany, I would say two things. First of all, the unquestioned central authority of Václav Havel. I mean, of course, Wałęsa was a key figure in Poland, but actually in Poland, it was the beginning and the end of his centrality in a way. The absolute unquestioned authority, which was a personal authority, was not an authority from any office or formal position. And I remember the wonderful moment when some students, for the first time, produced some badges which said Havel Natal, Havel to the castle, Havel for president. And Václav very, very diffidently came up to them and said, "Would you mind if I take one?" Of course, go ahead. Secondly, the deep ambivalence, and I think Michael might like to talk about this a bit too, the deep ambivalence of what I saw in him. On the one hand, this was everything he had worked for 20 years. On the other hand, he knew he was now going to be condemned to a life sentence in politics, with the greatest respect to all ambassadors here, to a life receiving ambassadors, receiving visited foreign ministers, your time chopped up into half-hour segments, all the burdens of office, which absolutely wore him down physically and I would say even mentally. So that's the second point, that deep ambivalence. Thirdly, the Velvet Revolution, a term which, by the way, Havel always insisted he did not coin. And one of these days, Jacques and I have to get together and pin down who actually coined it. I think it was a Western journalist. But it's a term that took on. It became, in a way, the archetypical, quote-unquote, Velvet Revolution. Yes? The archetype, the exemplar of what this new kind of peaceful revolution, 1989 replacing 1789, would be. And in a way it was. On the other hand, it was in a way an exception, because it came so late in 1989. Poland had gone, Hungary had gone, East Germany had gone, Gerasimov had declared the Sinatra doctrine, you do it your way. That I will not say success was foreordained, because it wasn't. It could have gone wrong, there could have been violence, it required statecraft, it required readiness to negotiate and compromise on both sides. But it had, let's put it this way, a very, very high chance of success. So it had slightly this fairy tale quality of the one that came so late, plus the theatrical element. There was Havel, the lead actor, script writer, and director of his own greatest play, The Velvet Revolution, 300,000 extras on Bedford Square, all jingling their keys, as you recall, the sound of Chinese bells, and I once wrote, "Cry your eyes out, Cecil B. DeMille." It was the most fantastic, fabulous moment. It became the archetype of Velvet Revolution. but it was also, I would say, rather an exceptional moment. I won't go so far as to say an unreal moment, but it almost has a feeling of unreality about it. Thirdly, the period of the presidency, I want to leave that mainly to Jacques and Michael to talk about that period. My own view is, and I hope we can talk about this, that as happens not seldom, he stayed a bit too long. And that actually he would have done better not to go for the second term of the Czech presidency. That not a great deal would have been lost. I mean, I think the Czech Republic would have come into NATO and into the EU as it was. Maybe we can have a conversation about that. Certainly what happened is that his own people in the end got tired of him, got slightly bored of him, bored of the moralistic tone, bored of the political compromises, and so he left, as you know, on something of a low in the view of public opinion. Now, against that, of course, you have to say he had set the tone for the whole transition. He set the tone morally in relation to the communist past, even though the Czech Republic became known for a rather undiscriminating kind of decommunization, Lustratia, which of course he wasn't a fan of. He set the tone in terms of relations to the earlier past, the great apology for the expulsion of the Sudeten Germans, a very important moment. He set the tone in relation to Europe and in relation to the Euro-Atlantic community. I think some of his greatest speeches were in relation to Europe and the Euro-Atlantic community. He also, of course, did see the country into NATO, and we had the unforgettable Prague summit of NATO, which I think we all attended, which was graced. I think Havel probably spent as much time on the theatrical preparations as on the strategic ones, and it included a rather weird, slightly surreal ballet performance, which you will remember. And after this rather weird performance, I was walking down the corridors to dinner, and I happened to find myself next to one of the guests, who was called Donald Rumsfeld. So I couldn't resist. And I said, Mr. Secretary, what did you think of the ballet? And Rumsfeld said, me, I'm from Chicago. I didn't understand anything. But anyway, it was a great performance. Of course, the other point just to make about the presidency is, and I think it's mildly ironical, that his people having got so tired of him, his standing in the polls having sunk so low, when finally he dies, there is then this extraordinary, and I have to say genuinely moving, outpouring of national grief, which puts him immediately in the company of Tomáš Garrigue-Masaryk. I mean, there's TGM and then there's Havel. But I couldn't resist the thought that Václav, somewhere, wherever he may be, would be sort of muttering to himself, well, there's your old Czech hypocrisy again. You know, they all turn against me, and then when I'm dead, they all turn out to mourn. My final comment, and with this I'll hand on to my colleagues. The historical assessment. When Havel died, I was thinking the great figures of the end of communism are really passing on. And I thought to myself, who are they? Who would be the great figures of the end of communism? I came up with 6 names. Lech Wałęsa, Václav Havel, Pope John Paul II, Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, undoubtedly, I see an eyebrow raised, and Helmut Kohl, without question. When we had this discussion in Act 1 of this Havelian play, Michael Shandovsky said, you've got to add Sakharov, with which I absolutely agree, and Margaret Thatcher, at which there's a certain sort of grumbling from the Oxford audience, but we'll leave that for later. But even if we add those two, the question is, why Havel in that time? These were all leaders either of big countries or great powers like the Roman Catholic Church. They were part of the world of power politics. The Catholic Church is in its way part of the world of power politics, or of a huge movement in Poland over 10 years. Havel, the leader of the transition in a relatively small country, why not Arpad Gürs? Why not somebody from East Germany, or Romania, or wherever it might be? And I think the answer is because he was this unique mixture of the artist, the intellectual, and the politician. In a sense, one of the finest representatives in our time of the great tradition of the Central European intelligentsia. And on top of that, an extraordinarily simpatico, delightful, warm, and humorous human being. And so of all those great figures at the end of communism, I think it's precisely for his really personal politics that Václav Havel belongs in that company. Thank you.